The ocean was a dark void, restless and endless, whispering the secrets of war in every wave. Out there, cutting through the black waters of the Pacific, moved a silhouette that had already begun to defy death. The USS Helena. She wasn't the largest ship in the fleet, nor the most decorated. But she was fast, fierce, and stubborn in a way that made even the sea respect her. Men whispered her name like a promise, because somehow, she always came back. They called her the machine gun ship, the ship that would not die. On her decks stood sailors who were little more than boys, their faces hardened by nights without sleep, their eyes scanning the horizon where the enemy could appear at any moment. Some chewed on cigarettes nervously, others tightened the straps of their helmets, but all of them listened, to the hum of the engines, to the creak of steel, to the silence before the storm. They knew this silence well. It was not peace. It was the moment when the world holds its breath, just before chaos breaks loose. Then, without warning, the sky tore open. The whine of Japanese bombers and torpedo planes echoed like the roar of demons rising from the sea. Dark shapes dropped out of the clouds, their wings catching faint moonlight. Searchlights flared from Helena's deck, slicing beams across the night sky. Enemy incoming. The shout spread like fire, and the ship came alive. Gunners raced to their stations. Ammunition belts clattered into place. Fingers gripped cold triggers. And then Helena roared. Her machine guns spat fire into the heavens, traces carving red and white lines through the darkness. The night erupted in fury. Explosions painted the ocean in orange light, waves rising and crashing like walls of fire. The ship trembled under the recoil of her own guns, yet she felt alive, almost human, like a beast unleashed. A young gunner, barely 19, braced himself behind his weapon. Sweat poured down his face, his hands raw from hours of drills, but now it was real. A plane screamed toward him, guns blazing. He didn't flinch. He pulled the trigger. The machine gun kicked back violently, rattling against his shoulder, but he held on. Tracer rounds sliced through the air, and for one heartbeat he thought he had missed. Then the plane erupted into flame, spiraling into the sea. He almost collapsed with relief, but there was no time. Another was already coming. The deck shook as bombs slammed into the water nearby, geysers of steam and shrapnel exploding skyward. Men were thrown off their feet, some never rising again. Others crawled back to their guns, deafened, dazed, but refusing to let go. Fire broke out near the forward turrets, black smoke curling into the night. Sailors rushed with hoses, shouting over the chaos, some disappearing into the smoke, never to return. Still Helena fought. Her machine guns hammered relentlessly, never slowing, never yielding. The barrels glowed red hot, but the men kept feeding them ammunition. Each burst of fire was defiance, a refusal to die. The ocean lit up with burning wreckage, enemy planes plunging into the waves, their final screams drowned by the roar of war. But the enemy had more to give. Torpedo planes swooped lower, skimming the waves, their deadly cargo aimed at Helena's heart. Torpedoes in the water. The warning came too late. The ship jolted violently as one struck her side. Steel shrieked, tearing apart. Men were hurled across the deck. Water surged into her hull, hissing as it met fire. The ship listed dangerously, as though the ocean itself was dragging her down. For a moment, it seemed Helena would not rise again. But then, as if fueled by the will of her crew, she steadied. The guns never fell silent. The men never stopped fighting. One officer, his face blackened with smoke, shouted over the chaos, "She's not going down tonight. Hold the line." And every man believed him. The night dragged on like a lifetime. Enemy after enemy fell, but Helena bled too. Fires consumed her decks. Holes gaped in her hull. Yet still she floated. Still she breathed. Still she fought. By the time dawn touched the horizon, the sea around her was littered with wreckage, broken planes, twisted metal, drifting bodies. The smell of oil and death clung to the air. Her crew stood battered and bloodied, some leaning on each other just to remain upright. They looked at the ship beneath their feet, scarred but alive, and something swelled in their chests. Pride, gratitude, awe. Helena had survived again. Against all odds, against death itself, she was still here. And so the legend grew. Among whispers and tired voices, she earned her name. She was no longer just a cruiser. She was the machine gun ship. The ship that would not die. The sea was restless that night, almost as if it knew something terrible was about to happen. Helena cut through the black waves, her steel hull glowing faintly under the eerie moonlight. The crew was exhausted but alert, each man at his post, each heartbeat synchronized with the hum of the ship's engines. They had fought before, they had bled before, but something about this night felt different, heavier, darker, filled with a silence that seemed to whisper of danger. Suddenly, the silence shattered. A Japanese flare lit the sky like false daylight, and before the men could blink, enemy shells screamed through the darkness. The first explosion ripped across the water, spraying molten fire. The second landed closer, the shockwave rattling every bolt of Helena's frame. Then came the third, direct hit. The ship convulsed, her steel belly tearing open as if wounded flesh. The night swallowed Helena's broken body, but it could not extinguish the stubborn light of her crew. The Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction, black and unforgiving, waves slapping at the men as if eager to drag them down. Oil from the ruptured tank spread across the surface, slick and poisonous, stinging the eyes of those barely clinging to consciousness. Yet still, they fought to live. In the distance, Japanese searchlights swept the waters, cruel beams hunting survivors like prey. Every flash of light sent ripples of fear through the men, forcing them to duck beneath the oil-slicked waves, lungs burning as they prayed not to be seen. Some never resurfaced, others surfaced too late, choking and gasping before vanishing under the endless dark. But amid terror, there were sparks of defiance. A wounded sailor, drifting on nothing but a plank of wood, whispered through cracked lips, "Helena isn't finished. Not tonight." His voice was hoarse, barely carried by the wind, yet it lifted spirits around him. They believed it, because they had to. Hours dragged on. The ocean was a cruel companion, numbing limbs, sapping strength, whispering temptations of surrender. Sharks began to circle, their fins slicing through the moonlit waves. The men saw them, silent predators closing in, and yet, not one scream broke the night. They clenched their fists, gritted their teeth, and tightened their circles, determined to protect one another. One sailor, too weak to swim, began to slip beneath the surface. His friend, though battered and half-drowned himself, dove after him, pulling him back up, tying him to a piece of floating wreckage. It was an act repeated again and again. Men saving men, refusing to let death claim their brothers without a fight. As the destroyers drew closer, their crews leaning over rails, tossing ropes and nets into the sea. Hands reached for the survivors, pulling them up one by one, lifting broken bodies from the grasp of death. Some sailors collapsed on deck, kissing the steel floor beneath them, whispering prayers of gratitude. Others could not stand, lying silent with eyes closed, breathing only faintly. But for many, rescue was too late. Dozens had already slipped beneath the waves during the long night, swallowed by the Pacific. Their brothers, saved but shattered, could only look back at the waters with hollow eyes, knowing Helena had taken part of them with her. The destroyer's captains knew the danger wasn't over. Japanese planes prowled the skies, and submarines lurked beneath the waves. Yet still, they stayed, refusing to abandon Helena's men until every survivor they could find was pulled from the water. This, too, was an act of defiance, against fear, against death, against the enemy. By the time the last man was hauled aboard, the sun was high. The Pacific glittered deceptively calm, hiding the wreck of Helena beneath its waves. But though the ship was gone, her spirit lived on in every survivor who had endured that night of fire and steel, terror and courage. The USS Helena had finally been claimed by the sea, yet her name would live forever. The ship that wouldn't die had become a legend, not because she survived, but because even in death, she refused to break the men who loved her.